Billionaire dad finds poor hungry twins at a train station on New Year's Eve, and what he does is unbelievable. The clock in the living room showed 5 in the afternoon when Calder Blake realized he would be spending another New Year's Eve alone. It wasn't something that bothered him, or at least that's what he told himself as he adjusted the gold wristwatch. A Christmas gift he'd bought for himself. After all, loneliness and Calder Blake were old acquaintances. The mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, was impeccable as always. The marble floors reflected the soft light pouring in through the floor-to-ceiling windows. The minimalist decor, chosen by an award-winning interior designer, created an atmosphere that architecture magazines would love to photograph. Everything there cost a fortune, from the contemporary art pieces to the imported doorknobs. Nothing was missing in that house, except for life. Sahivi would like these Belgian chocolates, he thought as he put a golden box away in the pantry. His 5-year-old daughter had a sweet tooth that he rarely indulged when she still lived there. Now, 6 months after the separation, he wondered if Amanda, his ex-wife, still maintained the same strict rules about sugar. Probably not. Her new husband, a chef from Boston, seemed much more relaxed about everything. Calder poured himself a 30-year-old whiskey, sipped it slowly, and watched the garden through the window. The grey sky promised snow for later. A typical December 31st in the American Northeast, cold, melancholic and silent, exactly what his life had become. Video calls with Ivy had become less frequent in recent weeks. The girl was excited about her new school, new friends, and especially her stepfather, who made animal-shaped pancakes for breakfast. How could he compete with that? He could barely operate the toaster without burning the bread. His phone vibrated. A message from his personal assistant, reminding him of the invitation to a New Year's Eve party at a partner's house. Elegant, exclusive, full of important people, and absolutely the last thing he wanted to do that night. Calder replied with a simple, "I won't be able to attend," and turned off the device. He didn't need elaborate excuses. When you have billions in the bank, people accept a no without much questioning. The sound of his footsteps echoed through the empty rooms as he walked aimlessly through the house. He stopped in front of Ivy's room, untouched since she left. The toys organized on the shelves, the bed made with the unicorn blanket, the children's books lined up, everything preserved like a small museum of memories. He closed the door, unable to stay there for long. The walls of the mansion seemed to close in on him, suffocating him with the weight of the silence. He needed to get out. A walk, he decided. Just to clear my head. He put on his most discreet coat, still visibly expensive to any keen observer, slipped on boots suitable for the cold, and went out into the frigid afternoon air. The snow was beginning to fall in light flakes, dancing in the air before touching the ground. Calder was not a man for aimless walks. His entire life had been built on clear objectives, calculated strategies, and measurable returns. Even his daily exercise was timed and monitored by state-of-the-art devices, but today he just walked, with no direction, letting his feet take him far away from the empty mansion. The streets of the wealthy neighborhood were deserted. Everyone was preparing for elaborate parties or last-minute trips to exotic destinations. Through the illuminated windows, he glimpsed families gathered, children running, tables being set, fragments of lives that seemed to belong to a completely different universe than his. Without realizing it, Calder wandered away from the exclusive residential area and reached a busier part of the city. Shops still open, people hurrying with last-minute shopping bags, Christmas music that lingered from the speakers. Normal life went on, oblivious to the emptiness he carried. The train station wasn't on his usual path, but something drew him there. Perhaps the fleeting idea of buying a ticket to anywhere, escaping for one night from who he was. A childish fantasy for a man who couldn't afford to disappear. Too many people, jobs and investments depended on his daily decisions. The inside of the station was warmer, but almost as empty as the streets. A few lone travelers sat waiting, constantly looking at their watches. Employees yawned, counting the hours until their shift ended. And then, on a secluded bench, he saw them. 2 little girls, identical, sitting side by side like forgotten dolls. Messy blonde hair, pale faces with freckles, Coats too thin for the cold. They looked to be Ivy's age, 5, maybe 6. Large green eyes that held a seriousness unfitting for such young children. Calder stopped and uncertain. He looked around, searching for any adults who might be with them. No one. The girls were talking to each other in low voices, occasionally rubbing their hands together to warm them. "Are you alone?" he asked, approaching cautiously. The two startled, like wild animals ready to flee. The one closer to him, a faded red ribbon in her hair distinguishing her from her sister, answered in a small voice, "We're waiting." "Waiting for whom?" Calder insisted, keeping a respectful distance. The girls exchanged quick glances, a silent communication that only twins seemed to master. "Just waiting," the same girl replied. Something about these children set off an alarm in Calder. The way they huddled on the bench, their suspicious glances, their inadequate clothing for the weather. Years of negotiating with people trying to hide their true intentions had made him good at detecting lies. "How long have you been here?" Another exchange of glances. This time, the second girl answered, "Since yesterday." Calder felt a tightness in his chest. Children, alone. On New Year's Eve, the temperature would continue to drop during the night. "Have you eaten today?" Both shook their heads no. "We haven't eaten in 2 days," confessed the one with the red ribbon, as if she had given up on keeping secrets. 2 days. Calder looked around again, searching for security cameras, station employees, anyone who might be observing the situation. The station was practically deserted on this holiday afternoon. "What are your names?" he asked, sitting on the bench across from them. "I'm Nellie," said the one with the ribbon. "She's Ruby." Ruby nodded shyly, studying Calder with wary eyes. "I'm Calder. Do you have somewhere to go?" The two looked at each other again. It was Ruby who answered this time, her voice even quieter than her sister's. "We're just going to stay here." The idea of two little girls spending New Year's Eve alone, hungry, in a train station stirred something inside Calder. An emotion he couldn't name, something he hadn't felt in a long time. Outrage, concern, responsibility. "Do you want to spend New Year's at a house?" The words came out before he could think. "At my house, I mean, there's food, heat. You can take a hot bath, eat and rest." Nellie squeezed her sister's hand, her eyes widening with a mix of hope and suspicion. "We don't know you," she said with a wisdom beyond her years. Calder nodded, respecting their caution. "I can call the police or social services if you prefer, but it's New Year's Eve, and it might take a while for someone to come. In the meantime, you'd still be hungry and cold." The girls whispered to each other for a few moments. Finally, Nellie looked at him. "Do you really have food at your house?" "Lots of food," he assured them. "We can make whatever you want." Another moment of silent deliberation between the sisters. Finally, Ruby gave a small affirmative nod, and Nellie announced, "We'll go. So but if anything is weird, we know how to run fast." The childish threat, so serious coming from those small lips, almost made Calder smile, but he kept his expression neutral, respecting the gravity of the situation for them. "Deal." The walk back home was silent. The girls walked side by side, keeping a safe distance from Calder. Nellie occasionally pointed out something on the street, a particularly bright Christmas decoration, a dog walking with its owner, and Ruby would respond with nods or whispers. The snow was falling harder now, and Calder noticed how the girls shivered in their thin coats. When the mansion appeared in the distance, imposing in its isolation, the twins stopped for a moment. "You live there?" Nellie asked, surprise evident in her voice. "Yes." "It looks like a castle," Ruby commented, speaking directly to him for the first time, without being prompted. "It's too big for just one person," Calder admitted. The house that had always seemed to him a symbol of success now, seen through the eyes of these children, looked absurdly disproportional, a monument to loneliness. They entered through the main door, and Calder watched the girls absorb the environment with wide eyes. Their worn shoes hesitated on the Persian rug, as if afraid to dirty it. "You can come in," he encouraged. "Let's first get you something to eat." In the spacious and immaculate kitchen, Calder realized he didn't know exactly what children their age ate. When Ivy was home, the housekeeper handled her meals, following a menu designed by a pediatric nutritionist. "What would you like to eat?" he asked, opening the well-stocked refrigerator. Nellie and Ruby looked at each other, apparently as lost as he was with so many options. "Anything," Nellie finally answered. Calder began to take items from the refrigerator and pantry: pasta, sauces, fruits, juices, bread, pies. An impromptu feast began to take shape on the marble countertop. "Do you like hot chocolate?" he asked, remembering how Ivy loved the drink on cold days. Their eyes lit up in response, and Calder felt an unexpected satisfaction. As he prepared the chocolate, he watched the girls timidly approach the food, as if they still couldn't believe they could touch it. "You can help yourselves," he said, "but maybe you'd like to take a warm bath first. I have some clothes that might fit you." Nellie looked at her own dirty clothes and then at her sister, who nodded slightly. "A bath would be nice," she agreed. Calder led them to one of the guest rooms, turned on the heater and prepared the bathroom. He found some of Ivy's old clothes that, although still a bit big for the twins, would be better than what they were wearing. "I'll leave you to it," he said, placing fluffy towels on the bed. "I'll be in the kitchen, finishing up dinner." Back in the kitchen, Calder found himself working with a purpose he hadn't felt in months. He set the dining room table, lit some candles, and put on soft music through the sound system. It wasn't an elaborate celebration, but it felt more welcoming than the solitary dinner he had planned. Half an hour later, the girls appeared at the kitchen entrance, transformed. Their blonde hair, now clean, shone like gold under the light. Ivy's clothes, soft t-shirts and sweatpants, enveloped their small bodies in comfort. Their faces, though still pale, had regained some color. "Have a seat," he invited, gesturing to the set table. "Dinner is ready." The twins settled in, looking with fascination at the plates before them. Calder served pasta, salads, bread, and finally the hot chocolate in large mugs. He watched with a strange satisfaction as they ate, first cautiously, then with evident pleasure. It was during dessert, generous slices of apple pie with ice cream, that Nellie looked at him with renewed curiosity. "Do you have a daughter?" she asked, pointing to the clothes they were wearing. The question hit Calder like a soft punch to the gut. So many emotions contained in that simple question. "I do," he replied after a moment, "but she lives with her mother, in another city." Nellie nodded, as if she perfectly understood the complexities of adult life. "Is she our age?" "Yes, 5 years old," Calder confirmed. "Her name is Ivy." "Ivy is a pretty name," commented Ruby, surprising him again by speaking spontaneously. "Thank you," Calder smiled. "Nellie and Ruby are pretty names too." A comfortable silence fell over the table as they finished dessert. Calder watched the girls, feeling something strange grow inside him, something warm and unsettling. There were people at his table, voices in his house. He no longer felt like a ghost wandering through empty rooms. Later, after settling the girls in the guest room, Calder stood in the dark hallway. The house was no longer empty. There were sounds of soft breathing coming from the room, small bodies warm under the blankets, glasses of water on the nightstands. It was the first night in a long time that Calder didn't feel invisible in his own home, and as the snow continued to fall outside, covering the world with its white blanket, something inside him, long dormant, slowly began to awaken. On the morning after New Year's Day, Calder woke up earlier than usual. For a moment he lay there, listening to the sounds of the house. Instead of the usual silence, he caught whispers and giggles coming from the hallway. It took him a few seconds to remember. The girls, the twins, Nellie, and Ruby. He got up, put on a robe, and opened his bedroom door. In the hallway, the two small figures froze when they saw him, as if they'd been caught doing something wrong. They were exploring the framed photographs on the wall. "Good morning," Calder said, trying to sound casual, as if waking up to find two children in his house was the most normal thing in the world. "Good morning," they replied in unison, their blonde hair still messy from sleep. "Did you sleep well?" he asked, realizing he didn't exactly know how to talk to children first thing in the morning. Nellie nodded, while Ruby just watched with her attentive eyes. They were still wearing Ivy's clothes from the night before, which now looked crumpled. "We should buy some clothes for you today," Calder said, more to himself than to them. In the kitchen, he realized another problem. He had nothing suitable for a child's breakfast. His pantry, though well-stocked with gourmet products, didn't contain the colorful cereals or animal-shaped cookies he remembered seeing at his sister's house when visiting his nephews. "What do you usually eat in the morning?" he asked the girls, who had followed him to the kitchen. Nellie and Ruby exchanged a quick glance. "Anything," Nellie replied, "just like the night before." Calder searched the fridge and pantry. He managed to make toast with jam, some cut-up fruit, and chocolate milk. It wasn't an elaborate meal, but the girls ate with enthusiasm, as if it were a banquet. It was while serving the hot chocolate into 3 mugs, 2 small, colorful ones he found at the back of the cupboard, probably left by Ivy, I suppose, and his usual coffee mug, that the reality of the situation hit him. 3 mugs on the table, 3 people in the house, a small improvised family on a January morning. "What are we going to do today?" Nellie asked, swinging her legs on the chair that was too high for her. Calder looked at the clock. On a normal day, he'd be preparing for a video conference or reviewing contracts. But today didn't feel like a normal day. "I think we need to buy some things for you," he replied. "And then we can decide." After breakfast, Calder made a call. Not to social services or the police, as he knew he should, but to his personal assistant. He asked her to cancel all his appointments for the rest of the week and to arrange for a delivery of children's clothes, toysy and age-appropriate food. In her usual efficiency, she didn't question it, just noted the sizes he estimated and promised to have everything delivered that same afternoon. While they waited for the deliveries, Calder improvised. He found paper and pens in his office and set up a drawing station on the large dining table. The girls, hesitant at first, were soon completely absorbed, creating colorful worlds on the white paper. "Look, I drew our house," said Ruby, surprising Calder by speaking spontaneously. In the drawing, a large house with many windows sheltered 3 smiling stick figures. "This is you," she pointed to the tallest one. "And this is us." Calder felt something strange in his chest, a mix of tenderness and alarm. Our house, these girls, whom he had known for less than 24 hours, already included him in their concept of home. And even more surprisingly, he didn't want to correct that impression. The deliveries started arriving shortly after the impromptu lunch they prepared together. Simple sandwiches and orange juice. First, the clothes, dresses, pants, shirts, pajamas, shoes, all in duplicate and in the approximate sizes. Then the toys, dolls, building blocks, children's books, board games. Finally, the groceries, cereals, cookies, fruit, milk, juices, ingredients for simple meals. Calder had quickly looked up online. Easy recipes for kids. The twins watched everything with wide eyes, as if they couldn't believe the amount of stuff appearing before them. "Is this all for us?" Ruby asked, timidly touching a blue dress with little stars on it. "Yes," Calder confirmed. "You need clean clothes and things to play with while you're here." Nellie's expression suddenly turned serious. "How long are we staying?" The question hit Calder like a punch to the gut. He knew what he should do, what the law and common sense dictated. Call the authorities, explain the situation, return the girls to the system. But something inside him resisted that idea. "For now, you can stay as long as you need," he answered vaguely. Nellie's face lit up, and she smiled at her sister. Then, they both ran to explore the new toys. The afternoon passed in a blur of activities, trying on new clothes, assembling puzzles, reading picture books. The mansion, once so silent, now echoed with children's voices and laughter. Calder realized he was smiling as he prepared dinner, a simple macaroni and cheese recipe he found online, described as a kid favorite. His culinary skills were limited, but the girls helped him, mixing ingredients and tasting the sauce with serious expressions of approval. After dinner, they sat in the living room, now transformed by scattered toys and drawings taped to the walls. Calder turned on the television and found an animated movie. The twins settled on the couch, one on each side of him, as if it were the most natural arrangement in the world. Halfway through the movie, Ruby fell asleep, her head lolling against Calder's arm. Nellie resisted a few more minutes before also succumbing to sleep. Careful not to wake them, Calder carried them, one at a time, to the guest room. As he tucked them in, he observed their peaceful faces. In just one day, these two children had completely transformed his house and his routine. The once empty corners now housed colorful toys. The fridge, once occupied only by sophisticated foods and expensive drinks, now held milk, yogurts, and juice boxes. The white, impersonal walls were coming alive with children's drawings. Back in the living room, Calder began to pick up the scattered toys. He should have been bothered by the mess, by the invasion of his meticulously organized space. But surprisingly, he wasn't. Every Lego piece found under the sofa, every doll left on the coffee table, every open book on the rug, it all made him smile. He sat on the now empty sofa and looked around. The house felt smaller, cozier, more alive, and he, who for so long had felt like a ghost wandering through empty rooms, now felt real, needed, present. Without realizing it, he had begun to enjoy being there, to care, to have something more important than meetings and contracts to fill his days, to have voices calling his name, laughter echoing through the halls, small hands holding his. "Tomorrow," he told himself, "I'll call the authorities. I'll explain the situation. I'll do the right thing." But as he climbed the stairs to his own room, Calder already knew deep down that he wasn't ready to let them go. Calder woke up suddenly, pulled from sleep by a sound that took him a few seconds to identify. Crying, sharp, desperate, and frightened, coming from the room where the girls were sleeping. He glanced at the digital clock on his nightstand, 3:27 a.m. For a moment, he was paralyzed, unsure what to do. There was no instruction manual for situations like this. On his rare visits with Ivy, Amanda had always handled the nighttime nightmares, leaving him in the comfortable role of an observer. The crying intensified, now accompanied by a small voice calling for help. Calder threw the covers aside and got out of bed on impulse. He hurried down the hall, his bare feet silent on the carpet. The guest room door was ajar. A star-shaped nightlight, purchased that very afternoon, cast a soft glow on the two beds. In the first one, Nellie was sitting up, her knees pulled to her chest, her face contorted with crying. In the other bed, Ruby watched her sister with wide, frightened eyes clutching the blanket. "Nellie," Calder called softly, entering the room. "What happened?" The girl looked at him, her face wet with tears, her eyes red and scared. She tried to speak, but only managed to sob harder. "It was a nightmare," Ruby explained, her voice trembling. "She dreamed that they found us." Calder sat on the edge of Nellie's bed, unsure what to do. Should he just comfort her with words? Call someone? Offer her water? Before he could decide, Nellie launched herself at him, her small arms wrapping around his neck with surprising strength. Her wet face pressed against his shoulder. The crying, muffled now by the fabric of his t-shirt, continued to shake her small body. "It's okay," Calder murmured, hugging her back awkwardly. "It was just a bad dream. You're safe here." Over Nellie's shoulder, he saw Ruby watching them, her eyes shining with unshed tears. He extended an arm toward her in a silent invitation. Without hesitation, the girl jumped from her bed and joined the hug, pressing herself against Calder's free side. It was the first time he had hugged them both at once, the warmth of their small bodies against his, the implicit trust in the gesture, the fragility and strength he felt in that contact. It all hit him like an unexpected wave. "So us, they were yelling in the dream," Nellie explained between sobs, "saying they were going to find us and take us back." "No one is going to take you," Calder replied, surprised by the firmness in his own voice. He felt them both relax slightly at his words, as if his voice had the power to ward off the monsters of the night. It was a strange feeling, to be someone's safe harbor, the person they turn to when fear strikes. "How about some warm milk?" he suggested, vaguely remembering that was what his mother used to offer when he had nightmares many decades ago. The twins nodded in sync, still clinging to him. Carefully, Calder stood up, a girl in each arm. They were light, too light, he thought, and they settled naturally against his body, their blonde heads resting on his shoulders. In the kitchen, lit only by the soft light above the stove, Calder managed, with some difficulty, to warm milk in a saucepan while still holding Ruby. Nellie had settled onto one of the high stools, her legs swinging in the air, her red-rimmed eyes following his every move. "My dad used to make hot chocolate when I had nightmares," Calder commented as he poured the milk into 2 mugs, but he added a secret ingredient. "What was it?" asked Ruby, her curiosity momentarily overcoming her fear. "Cinnamon," he replied, smiling as he found the jar in the cabinet. "Just a pinch. It makes all the difference." He sprinkled the cinnamon over the milk and handed the mugs to the girls, who blew on the hot drink before trying it. Their faces lit up with shy smiles as they tasted it. "It's good," Nellie approved. "It's magic," Calder corrected, sitting between them. "Milk with cinnamon chases away nightmares. At least that's what my dad always told me." "Was your dad nice?" Ruby asked, her green eyes fixed on him over the rim of her mug. The question caught him off guard. "Yes, when he was home," he answered honestly. "He traveled a lot for work, but when he was with me, he was attentive." "Like you," Nellie observed. Something tightened in Calder's chest. Was that what he was being? Attentive. It seemed too simple a word to describe what he felt. This confusing mix of protection, responsibility, and affection that grew with every hour spent with the twins. They stayed in the kitchen until the mugs were empty, and the girls' eyes began to grow heavy again. Calder guided them back to their room, helping them settle into their beds. As he turned to leave, 2 voices called out in unison, "Stay here." He looked at their small faces, illuminated by the light of the star-shaped nightlight, and knew he couldn't deny their request. He pulled the armchair from the corner of the room to a spot between the 2 beds and sat down. "So I'll stay until you fall asleep," he promised. "Can you tell a story?" Ruby asked. Calder thought for a moment. He couldn't remember any suitable children's stories. His knowledge of literature leaned more toward Russian classics and biographies of successful CEOs. He decided to improvise. "Down once upon a time, there were 2 princesses," he began, seeing the girls' eyes light up. "They were twins and had hair as golden as the sun. They lived in a faraway kingdom where the trees were made of chocolate and the rivers of lemonade." The story continued, filled with fantastical details and unlikely adventures, until the girls' eyelids grew too heavy to stay open. Ruby's breathing was the first to become deep and regular, followed shortly by Nellie's. Even after they both fell asleep, Calder remained in the armchair, watching them. The soft light highlighted their identical profiles, the small, upturned noses, the cheeks still round with childhood, the long lashes against their fair skin. They looked fragile and infinitely precious as they slept. It was in that moment, sitting between the 2 beds in the middle of the night, that Calder felt something shift inside him. A sense that, for the first time in a long time, there were people who genuinely depended on him, not on his money or influence, but on him as a human being, as a protector, as the responsible adult keeping the monsters at bay. And that feeling, instead of scaring him, strengthened him, as if he had discovered a purpose he never knew he was looking for. At some point, he fell asleep in the uncomfortable armchair, his arms crossed over his chest, his head lolling to the side. He was awakened by rays of sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of muffled giggles. He opened his eyes to find Nellie and Ruby already awake, sitting up in their beds, watching him with amused expressions. "You snore," Nellie informed him, laughing behind her hand. Calder straightened up in the armchair, feeling his back protest the poorly slept night. "I do not snore," he defended himself automatically, running a hand through his disheveled hair. "You do too," Ruby insisted, "like a little bear." He couldn't help but smile at the specific comparison. "So a little bear, huh? At least not a big one." The girls laughed, and the sound of their laughter, cleansed of the previous night's anguish, made something warm spread through Calder's chest. "Who wants pancakes for breakfast?" he offered, getting up and stretching his sore muscles. "I do," they both answered in chorus, jumping out of bed. In the sunlit kitchen, Calder prepared the pancake batter following a recipe he found online. The twins helped, adding ingredients and mixing the batter with intense concentration. There was flour scattered on the counter and splatters of milk on the floor, but he didn't care. The mess felt right somehow, a sign of life, of presence. With pancakes stacked on colorful plates and covered in maple syrup, they sat at the kitchen table. The morning sun streamed through the large windows, creating golden pools on the wooden floor. It was a perfect moment, Calder thought, the kind of scene that could be in a butter commercial or a Christmas card. It was then that Nellie, after exchanging a meaningful look with her sister, put her fork down and looked directly at him. "Are you going to call social services today?" she asked, her voice suddenly serious. The question caught Calder by surprise. He had considered it, of course. It was the proper procedure, the legal path. 2 children who were apparently abandoned or had run away needed to be reported to the authorities. "Why don't you tell me where you came from?" he suggested gently. That would help decide what to do. The twins exchanged another look, a silent conversation happening between them. It was Ruby who spoke first, her normally soft voice almost a whisper. "We lived with Mr. and Mrs. Landry. They're our foster parents, but they don't really want us." "Just the money the government gives them," Nellie completed, her eyes fixed on the table. Calder felt a pit in his stomach. "What do you mean?" "They get money to take care of us," Nellie explained, "but they spend it all on beer and cigarettes." "And they're never home," Ruby added. "It's only their older son, Tyler, but he drinks a lot too and gets angry." The picture the girls painted was disturbing. Calder kept his expression neutral, not wanting to scare them with his growing outrage. "At their house, did you have enough food?" he asked, trying to keep his voice calm. Nellie shook her head. "Sometimes, when the social worker was visiting. On other days, we ate whatever was left in the fridge, or nothing." "And at school?" Calder pressed. "Didn't you get meals there?" "We don't go to school," Ruby replied. "Mrs. Landry said we would start next year." 5 years old, not in school, with irregular meals and neglectful caregivers. Anger began to simmer inside Calder, but he kept it under control. He didn't want the girls to think he was angry with them. "And how did you run away?" he asked, pushing his plate aside, his appetite completely gone. "It was at their Christmas party," Nellie explained. "Everyone was drinking, loud music. No one noticed when we left through the back door." "We took a bus," Ruby continued. "How we had saved some coins we found around the house. And then another bus," Nellie added, "until we got to the big city, far away from them." "How long were you alone before I found you?" Calder asked, imagining the 2 little girls navigating the public transport system by themselves, hiding, looking for shelter. 3 days, I think," Nellie answered. "We slept in the stations. We ate what we could with the money we had." Calder closed his eyes for a moment, trying to control the mix of emotions flooding him. Anger at the adults who had neglected these children, admiration for the girls, courage and resilience, sadness for what they had endured in their short lives. "If you call social services, they'll send us back," Nellie said, her voice trembling slightly. "Or to another place just like it." Ruby reached her small hand across the table, touching Calder's. "This is the first place where we feel like we exist," she said, her intense green eyes fixed on his. "Like we're real people." The words hit Calder like a physical blow. Real people. 5-year-old children shouldn't have to articulate such a profound and devastating concept. They shouldn't know what it feels like to not be real, visible, existent. "You are real people," he stated forcefully, holding Ruby's hand and extending his other to Nellie. "And you are important, very important." The twins looked at him with a mix of hope and fear, as if they didn't dare to believe what they were hearing. "Can we stay with you?" Nellie asked, her voice barely audible. "Please." "We'll be good," Ruby quickly promised. "We won't be any trouble. And we can help with cleaning," Nellie added. "So we know how to wash dishes and sweep." Calder's heart ached hearing those offers, 5-year-olds promising domestic labor in exchange for basic shelter and affection. What had the world done to them? "You don't have to do any of that," he said, gently squeezing their small hands in his. "Children don't have to earn the right to be cared for. It's the adult's responsibility to take care of you, not the other way around." Their eyes glistened with unshed tears, and Calder realized it was probably the first time they had ever heard anything like that. In that moment, looking at those hopeful and vulnerable faces, Calder made a decision. It wasn't a long process of reflection or a careful analysis of pros and cons. It was an instant, unshakable certainty, as if a truth had just been waiting to be acknowledged. He would not return them to the system that had already failed them. He would not allow them to go back to a home where they were invisible, neglected, hungry. He would not let them be separated or sent to another place where the cycle of abandonment could repeat itself. "You can stay with me," he declared, the words coming out firm and clear, "and I'm going to do everything I can to make sure it's permanent." The girls' faces lit up as if someone had switched on lights inside them. Ruby was the first to move, jumping from her chair and throwing herself into Calder's arms. Nellie followed a second later, and suddenly he was enveloped in a double hug, feeling tears. He wasn't sure if they were the girls or his own, soaking his shirt. "Forever?" Nellie asked against his chest. "I'm going to do my best to make it forever," Calder promised. And there, in the sunlit kitchen, with two children clinging to him as if he were their only anchor in the world, Calder Blake, the lonely billionaire, the man who had built an empire but failed to build a family, felt truly strong for the first time in his life, not with the strength of power or money, but with the strength that comes from being needed, from being the difference between fear and safety, between hunger and fullness, between invisibility and existence. And he decided, in that moment, that he would use every resource at his disposal, his money, his connections, his influence, to ensure that Nellie and Ruby would never have to run from anything or anyone ever again. They had found a home, and so had he. The days turned into weeks with a speed that surprised Calder. The decision to keep the girls with him had not been easy to implement. It involved lawyers, social workers, judges, and an endless amount of paperwork. His money and influence opened doors, but even so, the process of temporary guardianship required time and patience. However, while the professionals handled the bureaucracy, life inside the mansion followed its new rhythm, as if the twins had always belonged in that space. On a Saturday morning, Calder woke to the sound of laughter coming from downstairs. He checked the clock, 7:23 a.m. He used to sleep in on weekends, exhausted from long hours at the office. Now the idea of wasting the mornings seemed like a shame. He went downstairs, still in his pajamas and slippers, following the sound to the living room. There, he found Nellie and Ruby building an elaborate fort with pillows, blankets, and chairs. He watched them for a moment, admiring the seriousness with which they discussed the exact placement of each element. "This pillow needs to go here to hold up the roof," Nellie explained, pointing with authority. Ruby shook her head, disagreeing. "It'll be crooked. It needs to be two pillows." "That looks like a complex engineering project," Calder commented, making them both turn around. "We're building a castle," Ruby explained, her eyes shining. "To protect us from the dragons," Nellie completed, as if it were obvious. Calder feigned a look of concern. "Dragons? In my house? This is serious." The girls giggled, delighted by his participation in their fantasy. "You can help," Ruby offered, holding out a pillow toward him. "We need taller walls." Without hesitation, Calder joined them on the floor. His $10,000 Italian suit had been replaced by sweatpants and comfortable t-shirts on weekends, a change his former self would have found unthinkable. For an hour, they built, demolished, and rebuilt the castle, until it occupied almost the entire room. Calder suggested using the Christmas lights, stored in the attic since December, to illuminate the inside of the fort. The girls applauded the idea, and soon the pillow castle was glowing with small, colorful lights. "It's the most beautiful castle I've ever seen," Ruby declared, her eyes reflecting the little lights. "We need food for the castle's inhabitants," Calder decided. "How about we make pancakes for breakfast?" In the kitchen, the three figures worked in harmony. The twins, wearing aprons that reached their ankles, had specific roles. Nellie was responsible for measuring the dry ingredients, while Ruby handled the liquids. Calder supervised, helping when necessary, but giving them space to experiment. "Stir slowly," he instructed, guiding Ruby's hand as she mixed the batter. "That's right. Like you're drawing big circles." Flour scattered across the counter. Drops of milk stained the floor, and the first pancake stuck to the pan, but none of it mattered. The kitchen, which was once just a pass-through in his life, was now the heart of the house. "Look, I made one in the shape of a moon," Nellie exclaimed, proud of her imperfect but character-filled creation. "Mine looks like an elephant," Ruby commented, tilting her head to observe her misshapen pancake. "Culinary artists," Calder praised, placing the creations on colorful plates. They ate in the middle of the pillow castle, sitting on soft blankets, telling stories of brave princesses and friendly dragons. Calder discovered he had a talent for inventing characters and adventures that made the girls laugh or widen their eyes in suspense. After breakfast, he proposed a painting session. Buying a specific table for art activities had been one of his best decisions. He covered it with newspaper and distributed pots of paint, brushes of various sizes, and large sheets of white paper. "Let's paint our family," Nellie suggested, dipping her brush in yellow paint. The word family made Calder pause for a moment. Was that what they had become? A family? The idea, which should have scared him, brought only a feeling of warmth and belonging. The three painted side by side, talking about colors and shapes. Calder, who had never had any artistic inclination, found that he didn't care about the result. The process was what brought joy. His painting, a clumsy attempt to portray three figures holding hands, drew fond laughter from the girls. "You draw funny," Ruby commented, without malice. "Not all of us have your natural talent," he replied, admiring her painting, surprisingly detailed for a 5-year-old. After lunch, sandwiches cut into star shapes, another of Calder's newly discovered skills, the girls asked to watch a movie. They snuggled on the sofa, Calder in the middle with a twin on each side. An animated movie about a superhero family filled the screen, but he was more attentive to the girls' reactions, their synchronized laughter, their excited comments, the way they leaned forward during the thrilling parts. At some point, Ruby fell asleep against his arm, and Nellie soon followed. Calder remained motionless, serving as a pillow for both of them as the movie continued. He watched their relaxed faces in sleep, their scattered blonde hair, the soft freckles on their cheeks. 2 months ago, his house was an empty, silent space. The rooms, though luxurious, seemed to exist only as a backdrop for a life that happened elsewhere. At the office, in meetings, on business trips, he would come home only to sleep and leave again the next morning. Now, every inch of the space had meaning. The corner of the room where the toy box was, the refrigerator covered in colorful drawings held by magnets, the nightstands with stacks of children's books for bedtime reading, the little bunny-shaped slippers by the door, the colorful toothbrushes in the bathroom. What was once empty now had a name, Nellie and Ruby. It had sound, laughter, conversations, singing in the bath, footsteps running down the hall. It had meaning, to care for, to teach, to protect, to love. As the girl slept peacefully beside him, Calder thought of Ivy, his biological daughter, so distant now, with whom video calls were becoming shorter and more spaced out. He felt a pang of guilt. Was he betraying Ivy by forming this new family? But then he understood something important. He wasn't replacing his daughter. The love he felt for Ivy remained intact, kept in a special place in his heart. What was happening was different. He was learning to expand his capacity to love, from an absent and distant father to someone present and involved. He wasn't replacing Ivy. He was learning to love again in a more complete and present way than he ever had before. And maybe, he thought as he gently stroked the sleeping twins' hair when Ivy came to visit, he could show her this new father he was becoming, a father who built pillow castles, made moon-shaped pancakes, and painted clumsy figures holding hands. A father who had finally understood that true success isn't measured by bank accounts or business deals, but by moments like this, silent, simple, and absolutely precious. Spring had arrived, bringing color to the city's central park. After weeks of snow and cold, the sun finally offered its warmth, inviting people to leave their homes. For Calder, it was the perfect opportunity for an outing with the twins. "We're going to the park today," he announced at breakfast as he served colorful cereal into the girls' bowls. Nellie and Ruby exchanged excited glances. For the past 2 months, their outings had been limited to indoor places, malls, children's museums, the movie theater. The idea of running in the open air, feeling the grass under their feet, was irresistible. "Can we feed the ducks?" asked Ruby, her green eyes shining with anticipation. "And go on the swings," added Nellie, nearly jumping in her chair. Calder smiled. "All of that and more. We can even have a picnic." The morning was spent in excited preparations. Calder, who once delegated even the simplest tasks to assistants, now found himself cutting sandwiches into perfect triangles and ensuring each water bottle had the right name written on it with a colored marker. The girls helped in their own way, Ruby carefully selecting toys, Nellie insisting on checking that everyone had sunscreen and hats. The Central Park was busy, but not crowded. Families were spread out on the lawn, children ran chasing soap bubbles, elderly couples walked hand in hand along the tree-lined paths. Calder parked, and before he could even completely turn off the engine, the twins were already unbuckling their seatbelts, eager to explore. "Remember to stay where I can see you," he recommended, unloading the basket and a bag of essentials, another novelty in his life, carrying a colorful bag full of wet wipes, decorated band-aids, and changes of clothes. The girls promised with quick nods and ran off toward the playground. Calder followed them, watching their blonde hair bounce in the spring sun. They were healthier now, their cheeks fuller, their skin with a glow that was missing when he found them. Nellie, always the leader, climbed the slide first, calling for her sister to follow. Ruby, more cautious, tested each step before climbing. Her fears, however, seemed to diminish with each new experience, replaced by a growing confidence that warmed Calder's heart. After an hour of play, the twins came back to him, cheeks flushed and breathing heavily. "We're hungry," Nellie announced, always direct. They found a perfect spot under a large, leafy tree. Calder spread out the checkered blanket and arranged the food. Ruby helped, placing folded napkins next to each plate, while Nellie distributed the water bottles. The meal passed with simple conversation and laughter. The twins told elaborate stories about magical castles, friendly dragons, and princesses who saved princes. Calder listened attentively, asking questions at the right moments, fueling their fantasies. After eating, they walked to the lake to feed the ducks, who, Ruby, normally the shyest, proved to be surprisingly brave, holding out her hand with corn as the ducks approached. Nellie, on the other hand, threw the corn from a distance, laughing when the birds ran toward her. "Look at that little duckling." Ruby pointed to a smaller duck. "He needs to eat more to grow strong." Calder smiled at the observation. The girls had developed a special sensitivity for caring for the more vulnerable, perhaps a reflection of their own experiences. Time passed smoothly. Calder checked his watch. They had been at the park for almost 3 hours, but the twins showed no signs of tiredness. "Can we go to the swings now?" Nellie asked, pointing to the furthest area of the playground. Of course," Calder agreed. "After that, we need to think about heading home." The girls ran ahead, following the paved path that circled the lake. Calder followed a few steps behind, watching them stop to examine a colorful flower or swerve to avoid stepping on ants. It was when they were almost at the swings that everything changed. A couple stopped abruptly on the path ahead. The woman, thin with faded red-dyed hair, pointed in the girls' direction. The man beside her, tall, with a stubbly beard and a worn-out cap, frowned. "It's them!" the woman exclaimed, her shrill voice cutting through the park's tranquil air. Calder saw the exact moment the twins noticed the couple. It was like watching a switch being flipped. All the joy and liveliness vanished from their faces, replaced by a pure, instant terror that made his blood run cold. "Nellie, Ruby," the woman called, advancing toward them. "Where have you been? We've been looking everywhere for you." The girls were paralyzed for a second, like cornered animals. Then, as if sharing a single thought, they turned and ran, not away, but straight to Calder. "Who's this creep who's stealing our kids?" the man growled, following the woman. Calder understood immediately. The Landrys, the foster parents the girls had run away from, the couple who had kept them hungry and scared. Nellie and Ruby clung to his legs with such force that he almost lost his balance. He could feel the trembling in their small bodies, hear their rapid, frightened breaths. "We want to stay with you," Nellie whispered, looking up at him with tear-filled eyes. Ruby just pressed her face against his leg, as if trying to disappear. Calder placed a protective hand on each of their blonde heads and straightened his shoulders, facing the couple who now stood before him. "These are our girls," the woman declared, pointing a finger with long, chipped nails. "They ran away from home 2 months ago. We've had the police looking for them." "Is that so?" Calder replied, his voice calm but firm. "Interesting, because I have documents showing I've had temporary custody of them for almost that same amount of time." The man took a step forward, his beer breath noticeable even from a distance. "Listen here, you rich guy. I don't know what story these brats told you, but they're our responsibility. The government pays us to take care of them." The mention of payment, not the children's well-being, confirmed everything the twins had told him. Calder felt a wave of anger rise in his chest, but he kept his expression neutral. "I understand your concern," he said, measuring each word. "But they are under my care now, with legal authorization." The woman let out a mocking laugh. "Let me guess, you're one of those playboys who thinks he can buy anything, including children. I bet you don't even know how to take care of them properly." "We don't want to go." Ruby's voice, usually so soft, came out clear and determined. "You're mean, and you're ungrateful," the woman retorted, "after everything we've done for you." "You didn't do anything," Nellie shot back. "We were starving. You yelled and drank all the time." The man advanced menacingly. "I'll teach you to respect adults." Calder stepped forward, placing himself between the girls and the couple. His posture, though calm, conveyed an authority that made the man retreat slightly. "I suggest you reconsider your approach," Calder said, his voice now laced with a coldness he reserved for high-stakes negotiations. "I can assure you I have the legal means to keep these children under my protection. We'll see what the police have to say about that," the woman threatened, pulling a worn-out cell phone from her purse. "Excellent idea," Calder agreed, to the couple's surprise. "In fact, I'll make it easier." Without breaking eye contact, he took his own phone from his pocket and dialed a number. "Stephen, Calder Blake. I'm at the Central Park with the girls, and we've run into the Landrys." "Yes, exactly. Can you send someone over immediately and bring the temporary custody papers?" "Thank you." He hung up and smiled politely at the stunned couple. "My lawyer and a court officer will be here in a few minutes. I suggest we wait comfortably." The mention of a lawyer and a court officer made the woman turn pale. The man pulled her by the arm, whispering something in her ear. "This isn't over," she threatened, pointing a finger at Calder. Then, casting one last angry glare at the twins, the couple walked away quickly, disappearing among the park's trees. As soon as they were gone, Calder knelt to be at the girls' level, who were still shaking. "They're gone," he assured them, stroking their pale faces. "You're safe now." "They're going to come back," Ruby whispered, her eyes wide with fear. "Aren't they going to take us?" "No," Calder answered firmly, looking directly into each of their eyes. "They won't. And this is where you're going to stay. With me." The words came out with an absolute certainty that surprised even himself. It wasn't just an empty promise to calm scared children. It was a declaration of intent, a commitment he was prepared to defend with everything he had. The twins hugged him simultaneously with a force born of desperation and relief. Calder wrapped his arms around them, feeling their tears wet his shirt. "Let's go home," he said softly, standing up and taking each by the hand. The walk back to the car was silent. The girls stayed close to him, frequently looking over their shoulders, as if expecting to see the Landrys appear at any moment. Calder remained alert, scanning the park for the couple, but there was no sign of them. In the car, while adjusting the twins' seatbelts, he noticed how their small bodies were still tense, ready to flee. "They won't hurt you," he promised, holding both of their hands. "Never again." On the way home, he called his lawyer again, this time using the car's sound system. The girls in the back seat listened intently to every word. "Stephen, thanks for answering so quickly before," Calder began. "The Landrys left when I mentioned you and an officer, but I'm sure they'll be back. We need to act now." "They have no legal basis to reclaim custody," came the deep voice from the other end of the line. The social worker already documented the abandonment when the girls were found. But we need to solidify your position. I want to keep them legally, Calder declared, looking in the rearview mirror at the twins. Permanently. What do I need to do? There was a pause on the other end. Are you talking about adoption? I am, he confirmed without hesitation. It's a long process, Calder. Even with your resources, it will take time. Background checks, home visits, psychological evaluations, court hearings. I don't care about the time or the cost, he replied firmly. I want to do this right. I understand. I'll start the paperwork immediately. In the meantime, I'll reinforce the temporary custody and get a restraining order against the Landrys. Do it today, Stephen. Use any resources necessary. Consider it done. And Calder, it's good to see you fighting for something like this. The call ended, and a thoughtful silence filled the car. In the back seat, Nellie and Ruby looked at each other, processing what they had heard. What's adoption? Ruby finally asked, her small voice barely audible over the sound of the engine. Calder took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. It's when someone officially decides to be the parent of a child they didn't give birth to. It's a legal commitment and, more importantly, a commitment of the heart. You want to be our dad, for real? Nellie asked, hope and fear mixed in her voice. Calder met their eyes in the rearview mirror. Yes, for real. Forever, if you want me to. The smile that lit up the twins' faces was like the sunrise after the longest night. Back at the mansion, Calder spent the rest of the day rearranging his schedule, making calls, preparing for the legal battle ahead. The girls stayed close, as if fearing that if they moved away, the promise of safety might vanish. As night fell, while the twins finally slept after many stories and assurances of safety, Calder sat in his office, on his computer screen, endless lists of adoption requirements. In his mind, a single certainty: he would do anything to keep his promise. Because those two girls, whom fate had placed in his path on a cold New Year's night, had filled a void he didn't even know existed. And now, he was determined to fight for them, with his heart and with all the resources he had. The road would be long and undoubtedly full of obstacles. But looking at the photograph that now adorned his desk, him and the smiling twins on a snowy day, Calder Blake knew that this was the most important fight of his life, and it was one he could not, would not lose. The day dawned grey and rainy, as if the sky shared the anxiety Calder felt. After 3 months of preparation, reports, psychological evaluations, and countless meetings with lawyers, the day of the hearing had finally arrived. Are we going to win? Nellie asked, as Calder adjusted the blue ribbon in her blonde hair. The twins were dressed identically, navy blue dresses, black patent leather shoes, ribbons in their hair. They looked like little students on their way to school, not children about to have their future decided by strangers. We'll do our best, Calder replied, trying to sound confident despite the knot in his stomach. The judge wants what's best for you. And that's staying with you, Ruby stated with a simplicity that made Calder's heart ache. The family court was less intimidating than the courtrooms shown in movies. No jury, no large audience, just a moderately sized room with the judge's bench, tables for the lawyers, and a few rows of benches for the interested parties and witnesses. Stephen D. Calder's lawyer was waiting at the entrance. His usually impassive face showed signs of tension, a reminder that, despite all the resources and preparation, nothing was guaranteed. The Landrys are already here, he informed in a low voice. With their own lawyer. Calder nodded, lightly squeezing the girls' hands. They had practiced what the hearing would be like, explained that they would see their former foster parents, but that they would be safe the entire time. Still, he felt their small fingers tense in his grip. When they entered the courtroom, Calder immediately saw the Landrys sitting on the opposite side. Mrs. Landry had traded her faded red hair for a more discreet brown, and both wore distinctly new clothes, an obvious attempt to appear respectable for the court. Nellie and Ruby moved closer to Calder upon seeing the couple, their small bodies pressed against his legs, just like at the park. He gently guided them to their seats, whispering words of encouragement. "All rise," the bailiff announced as the judge entered, a middle-aged man with a serious expression and attentive eyes. The hearing began with legal formalities. Judge Holloway explained the purpose of the session: to determine the permanent custody of the minors Nellie and Ruby Landry. Then, he invited the lawyers to present their opening statements. The Landry's lawyer went first, painting a picture of a hard-working couple who simply didn't have the resources to offer luxuries, but who loved and cared for the girls as best they could. He described the children's running away as a misunderstanding, and Calder as a rich man using his money to buy a family. Stephen countered with facts: medical reports showing signs of malnutrition when the girls were found, psychological evaluations indicating trauma consistent with neglect, and the abandonment itself. The girls had been missing for days without the Landrys even filing a police report. Then it was time for testimonies. Mrs. Landry was the first to take the witness stand, her face a mask of maternal concern that didn't match the restless fingers fiddling with her purse strap. "We loved those girls like they were our own," she declared, a single tear strategically rolling down her cheek. "We worked hard to give them the best we could. We took good care of them. There was never any yelling. They never went without food." Her husband nodded emphatically from his seat, as if every word were the gospel truth. "And why did the girls run away, Mrs. Landry?" Stephen asked during the cross-examination. "They were always difficult," she replied, glancing quickly at the twins. "They make up stories, you know. They have very active imaginations." Nellie squeezed Calder's hand so tightly he could feel her little nails in his skin. Ruby had lowered her head, as if she wanted to disappear. Mr. Landry followed with a similar testimony: vague denials, veiled accusations against the girls, and a portrayal of himself as a tireless worker who only wanted the best for his little girls. Then, to everyone's surprise, Stephen called a witness who was not on the original list: Mrs. Eleanor Jenkins, a white-haired woman with a dignified posture who walked with the aid of a cane. "Mrs. Jenkins, you were the Landry's neighbor, correct?" Stephen asked after the initial formalities. "I still am," the elderly woman confirmed. "I've lived in the house next door for 32 years. "And you knew Nellie and Ruby?" The woman smiled briefly in the girls' off direction. "Of course I did. Beautiful girls, too polite for their age, if you ask me." "Too polite?" "The way children get when they're in constant fear of adults," she clarified, her voice gaining firmness. "She's always saying, 'Oh, please,' and no, excuse me," like they were walking on eggshells. "Did you interact with them frequently?" "More than I should have had to," she replied, casting a stern look toward the Landrys. "I fed them myself more than once. They'd come to my door when the cupboard was bare. I heard constant fighting from that house, yelling, breaking bottles. Those girls lived in fear." The Landrys' lawyer objected, claiming the testimony was based on impressions, not facts. The judge allowed Mrs. Jenkins to continue, but asked her to stick to what she had directly witnessed. "Facts," the old woman repeated, her indignation evident. "Oh, the fact is those children showed up at my door with empty stomachs, while the government money went to beer and betting. The fact is I saw them shivering in the cold because they didn't have proper coats in the winter. The fact is when they disappeared, the Landrys didn't come asking if I'd seen them until 2 days later, and they seemed more worried about the government check stopping than about their well-being." A heavy silence fell over the room after Mrs. Jenkins' testimony. The Landrys seemed restless in their seats, avoiding direct eye contact with the judge. Finally, it was Calder's turn. As he sat on the witness stand, he felt the weight of the moment. It wasn't just his future at stake, but that of 2 children who had trusted him when they had no one else. In a firm voice, he recounted how he had found the girls, the state they were in, and how they had completely transformed his life and his home. "Before them, I lived in an empty mansion. I had professional success, but I came home to a place with no life, no purpose beyond work," he confessed. "Nellie and Ruby brought light, noise, mess, and love. I learned to make animal-shaped pancakes, to build pillow forts, to understand the difference between a friendly dragon and a mean dragon in bedtime stories." A small smile appeared on the judge's face. "I'm not saying I'm perfect," Calder continued. "I'm learning to be a father every day, but I love those girls as if they've been mine from the very beginning. And I will do anything, Anything to ensure they have the safety, the affection and the opportunities they deserve. After the testimonies, the judge called for a 30-minute recess to review the evidence. The wait was agonizing. Calder and Nellie and Ruby waited in a small side room, the girls drawing in notepads Stephen had provided, Calder alternating between nervous pacing and trying to appear calm so as not to scare them. When they returned to the courtroom, Judge Holloway maintained a neutral expression as everyone settled. Then he looked directly at the twins. "Nellie and Ruby," he called gently, "would you like to say anything before I make my decision?" The girls looked at each other, that silent communication Calder knew so well. It was Nellie who stood up first, pulling her sister by the hand. "We just want to stay with Calder," she said simply. "He takes real care of us," Ruby nodded, adding in her soft voice, "and we love him." The words, so simple and direct, brought tears to Calder's eyes. The judge nodded gravely, thanked the girls, and then announced his decision. "Based on the evidence presented and in the best interests of the children, I grant provisional custody of Nellie and Ruby to Mr. Calder Blake, with the recommendation that the adoption process proceed as normal." The Landrys protested, but the judge was firm. "Furthermore, I am issuing a restraining order prohibiting the Landrys from coming within 500 yards of the children or Mr. Blake." Leaving the courthouse, under a sky now brightened by a shy sun breaking through the clouds, Ruby tugged on the sleeve of Calder's jacket. "Is it forever now?" she asked, her green eyes fixed on his, searching for the truth that only children can see. Calder knelt, getting down to their level. "We still have a few steps ahead of us," he explained honestly. But yes, Ruby. Now it's forever." The twins smiled, and in that moment, under the sun that was finally overcoming the rain, Calder knew he had found the true meaning of family. The spring sun streamed through the kitchen windows, creating golden pools on the wooden floor. Calder watched the pancakes in the pan, waiting for the exact moment the edges began to brown before flipping them. Beside him, Ruby carefully counted the drops of vanilla extract falling into the cake batter that Nellie was mixing in a large bowl. "Is this good?" Nellie asked, lifting the whisk to show the batter's consistency. Calder leaned in to assess it. "Perfect. Now we can put it in the pan." It was an ordinary Sunday, the first Sunday after the official adoption, finalized on Friday with the signing of the last documents. 8 months after finding 2 hungry little girls in a train station, Calder Blake was officially a father. There was nothing extraordinary about that morning, no elaborate celebration, no special event planned. Just a quiet breakfast, the preparation of a simple chocolate cake, and vague plans for the rest of the day. And that was exactly what made it all so special. "Can I lick the spoon?" Ruby asked, already reaching for the batter-covered utensil. "Share with your sister," Calder reminded her, transferring the pancakes to a plate. The girls sat at the kitchen table, each with half of the batter spoon, their faces showing identical expressions of satisfaction. Calder served the pancakes, cut up fresh fruit to go with them, and joined them with his cup of coffee. "What are we going to do today?" Nellie asked between bites. "Nothing special," Calder replied. "Maybe play that new game we bought. And we need to do some laundry." "Can we hang it on the line outside?" Ruby suggested. Mrs. Mitchell said clothes dried in the sun smell like clouds. Calder smiled, remembering the girls' kind teacher, who had become a constant presence in their conversations since they started school 3 months ago. "Of course, we can. I think it's a perfect day for the smell of clouds." After breakfast, while the cake baked in the oven, filling the house with the scent of chocolate, the 3 of them sat in the living room. The board game, a simplified version of Monopoly suitable for the twins' age, was spread out on the rug. The rules were explained, the game pieces chosen, and the friendly competition began. "I bought the ice cream shop," Nellie celebrated, placing a small plastic house on her new property. "And I got the amusement park," Ruby replied, equally proud of her acquisition. Calder, who was playing more to lose than to win, couldn't help but smile at the girls' enthusiasm. Their laughter when he landed in jail or had to pay taxes filled the room, mixing with the clatter of dice and the sliding of colorful cards. The kitchen timer went off, announcing that the cake was ready. The three figures went together to take it out of the oven, a small procession that had become a ritual on baking days. "It's perfect," Nellie declared, observing the golden brown chocolate cake, exhaling fragrant steam. "We need to wait for it to cool before we frost it," Calder reminded them, placing the cake on a wire rack. While they waited, it was time for the next task, laundry. The laundry room, once an almost decorative space in Calder's mansion, was now used daily. Nellie and Ruby helped sort the clothes by color, a skill they took very seriously. "This is light pink. Does it go with the lights or the colors?" Ruby asked, holding up a t-shirt. "It depends on how pink it is," Calder replied, pretending to analyze the question deeply. "Fauch, what do you think?" After serious deliberation, the t-shirt was classified as colored and placed in the appropriate pile. The washing machine was loaded, the detergent measured, and the cycle started. With the sun now high in the sky, it was the perfect time to hang the already washed clothes on the line in the garden. Calder had installed the clothesline just 2 weeks ago, after multiple requests from the twins. Until then, the automatic dryer had been sufficient, but the girls were determined to experience the so-called smell of clouds. In the garden, Calder handed each of them a small basket with damp clothes and colorful clothespins. He taught them to shake the items out before hanging them, to use 2 pins for each item, and to leave space between the clothes for the wind to circulate. The girls' tongues peeked out in concentration as they performed the task with absolute seriousness. Their movements were clumsy, and some pieces had to be readjusted by Calder, but the pride on their faces when they finished was priceless. "Did we do it right?" Ruby asked, looking at the collection of clothes swaying gently in the breeze. "Perfectly right," Calder confirmed, affectionately tousling their blonde hair. Back in the kitchen, the cake was cool enough to be frosted. The chocolate frosting was prepared and generously applied, with the girls insisting on adding colorful sprinkles on top, more than would be considered elegant, but exactly the right amount of joy. Lunch was simple, sandwiches made together, fresh orange juice, and, of course, generous slices of chocolate cake for dessert. Sitting at the kitchen table, they talked about everything and nothing, the classes for the coming week, the book they were reading together before bed, plans for the approaching summer vacation. After lunch, in the quiet that follows a satisfying meal, Calder watched the girls draw at the living room table. The afternoon sun streamed through the large windows, illuminating their blonde hair. All around, the house that was once just an empty shell now overflowed with life. Drawings on the walls, toys in the corners, books stacked on tables, colorful clothes swaying in the garden. Through the window, he could see the clothesline with clothes dancing in the breeze. In the kitchen, the scent of chocolate cake still lingered. In the living room, the board game waited, ready to be resumed. And there, before him, 2 little girls who called him Dad were drawing, quietly humming a song learned at school. It was an ordinary Sunday, a Sunday like any other, and yet extraordinary in its simplicity, in its completeness. This is it, Calder thought, feeling a deep sense of peace settle in his chest. This is home. Calder had been staring at the phone in his hand for almost 10 minutes. The numbers were already dialed, the contact for Amanda, his ex-wife, but his finger hesitated over the call button. Video calls with Ivy had become increasingly rare in recent months, replaced by brief, distant conversations. Guilt weighed on his shoulders, absorbed in the new dynamic with the twins. He had allowed the relationship with his biological daughter to fade even more. Nellie and Ruby knew about Ivy, of course. They had seen pictures, heard stories, even asked when they would meet her. Their curiosity about Calder's other daughter grew every day. "You have to call Dad," Nellie had said the night before, with the surprising wisdom of her 5 years. "Otherwise, how will we ever meet our sister?" That word, sister, had been the catalyst. With a deep sigh, Calder finally pressed the call button. "Calder." Amanda's voice sounded surprised on the other end of the line. "Is there a problem?" "No, no problem," he hurried to reply. "Actually, I was wondering if Ivy could spend a weekend here with me. It's been a while since we've seen each other in person." There was a moment of silence, and Calder could almost feel Amanda's hesitation. "I heard you. Adopted children," she finally said. Yes, he confirmed. 2 girls, twins, Nellie and Ruby. Ivy mentioned something about it on our last video call. She seems curious. I'd like for her to meet them, Calder said, feeling the vulnerability in his own voice. They're the same age. I think they could get along. Another silence, longer this time. Then, to his surprise, Amanda sighed. I think it would be good for her. Ivy asks about you more than she lets on. And I'm happy you found something that seems to be doing you good, Calder. They arranged the details. Amanda would bring Ivy the following weekend. Calder hung up the phone feeling a mix of relief and anxiety. When he turned around, he was met by 2 pairs of green eyes watching him intently from the office doorway. Is she coming? Ruby asked, almost whispering. Yes, he confirmed with a smile. Ivy is coming to visit us next weekend. The following days were filled with preparations. The twins insisted on making everything perfect for Ivy's arrival. They cleaned their toys, organized the guest room where she would sleep, and even made welcome drawings to hang on the door. What if she doesn't like us? Ruby asked the night before the visit as Calder tucked her in. She's going to love you, he assured her, though he felt the same apprehension. Just give her some time, okay? Ivy can be a little shy at first. On Saturday morning, the mansion was a mix of excitement and nervousness. The twins had chosen their favorite outfits, matching dresses, one blue and one green, but in the same style. Calder checked for the 10th time that everything was in order. Ivy's room prepared, the fridge stocked with her favorite snacks, the games she liked set out in the living room. When the doorbell rang at 10 a.m. sharp, everyone froze for a moment. They're here, Calder announced, trying to keep his voice steady. Let's go. Nellie and Ruby positioned themselves strategically behind him, holding onto his legs as he opened the door. Amanda was there, as elegant and composed as ever, with a hand on Ivy's shoulder. The girl had grown since Calder had last seen her in person, almost 6 months ago. Her brown hair was longer, and her eyes, so much like his own, watched him with a mixture of longing and uncertainty. Hi, Princess, he said, kneeling to be at her level. Ivy hesitated for only a second before running into his arms. Dad! The hug lasted for several seconds, Calder taking in the childish scent of his daughter's hair, the texture of her wool cardigan, the warmth of her small body against his. When they finally separated, Ivy looked curiously at the 2 figures partially hidden behind her father. You must be Ivy, said Nellie, stepping forward with her characteristic confidence. I'm Nellie, and this is my sister, Ruby. Ruby offered a shy wave, her large eyes studying the newcomer with interest. You really are twins, Ivy observed, looking from one to the other. How do I tell you apart? I talk more, Nellie explained simply, and Ruby draws better. Calder and Amanda exchanged a look over the children's heads, a moment of mutual understanding they hadn't shared in a long time. I'll leave you to it then, Amanda said, after quickly running through the usual instructions. Allergy medication or bedtime or dietary restrictions. When the door closed, the 4 of them stood in the entrance hall, a momentary silence hanging over them. Want to see our room? Nellie offered, breaking the ice. We have a unicorn collection. Ivy's face lit up. Unicorns? I collect them too. And just like that, as only children can, the initial barrier began to crumble. The 3 girls went up the stairs, with Ivy in the middle, already discussing the colors and special powers of their favorite unicorns. Calder followed them, keeping a respectful distance. He watched from the doorway as the twins proudly showed Ivy their room, the toys as the books, the paintings on the wall. This used to be my room, Ivy commented, looking around. Calder felt a pang in his chest, fearing a negative reaction, but then Ivy smiled. It looks nicer now. It has more fun stuff. The next few hours passed in a blur of activities. The girls, initially separated by a subtle barrier of shyness, gradually grew closer. They played house, drew together at the large table in the living room, and explored the garden in search of magical treasures, colorful stones, interesting leaves, and the occasional fascinating insect. During lunch, Calder watched in wonder as the 3 chatted animatedly, as if they had always known each other. Ivy told them about her school in Boston, about the dog her stepfather had adopted, and about the ballet classes she took. "You know how to dance ballet?" Ruby asked, her eyes wide with admiration. "A little," Ivy replied, suddenly shy. "I can show you later." In the afternoon, the girls decided to make friendship bracelets. Calder provided colorful threads, beads, art, and small charms he had bought especially for the occasion. Sitting on the sofa, he pretended to read a book while secretly watching the interaction of the three around the coffee table. Ivy, surprisingly, took on the role of teacher, showing the twins how to weave the threads into specific patterns. Her small hands gently guided the others, correcting when necessary and praising their progress. "This one is for you," said Ruby as she finished her first bracelet, handing it to Ivy. It was simple, with unevenly braided blue and green threads, but made with such care that its value was immeasurable. Ivy looked at the bracelet with genuine appreciation. "It's beautiful. I'll wear it always." She immediately put it on her wrist, showing it off with pride. "Now we're official friends." "Not just friends," Nellie corrected. "Sisters." The word hung in the air for a moment. Ivy looked at Calder as if seeking confirmation. "Are you my sisters?" she asked, her voice small and hesitant. Calder closed his book and came closer, sitting on the floor with them. "That's up to you," he answered carefully. "Families can come in many different forms." Ivy frowned, processing the information. Then, slowly, a smile began to form on her face. "Dad, can they be my sisters?" "For real?" The question, so sincere and hopeful, made something tighten in Calder's chest. He looked at the three faces turned toward him, Ivy with her eager expression, Nellie practically vibrating with anticipation, Ruby with big, hopeful eyes. "If you want them to be, they already are," he replied, feeling emotion choke his voice. The three girls exchanged glances, as if sealing a silent pact. Then, simultaneously, they threw themselves onto Calder in a group hug that almost knocked him over. The rest of the day passed in a harmony Calder had never imagined possible. The girls talked, laughed, occasionally argued about game rules, only to make up minutes later. They were children being children, without the weight of the circumstances that had brought them together, without the shadows of the past. In the evening, after a noisy dinner of homemade pizza they made together, Calder suggested a photo session. "We need to capture this moment," he explained, arranging the girls on the sofa. He set up the camera on a tripod, adjusted the timer, and ran to position himself behind the sofa, one hand on Ivy's shoulder, the other on Ruby's, with Nellie in the middle. "Say family," he instructed. "Family," the three shouted in unison, bright smiles lighting up their faces. On Sunday afternoon, while Ivy was showing the twins how to make an origami star, Calder slipped away to his office. He connected the camera to his computer, selected the best photo from the impromptu session, and sent it to print on a digital frame he had ordered weeks before but had never had the courage to use. When the print was ready, he stood for a few minutes looking at the image. There they were, him in the center, with Ivy, Nellie, and Ruby hugged around him, all smiling as if nothing else in the world mattered at that moment. And really, nothing did. With the frame in his hands, he returned to the living room where the girls were still playing. Without a word, he went to the main wall, a space that had always remained empty, despite decorators and suggestions over the years. With precise movements, he hung the picture right in the center. The girls stopped their playing, watching him with curiosity. "Is that our family now?" Ruby asked, coming closer to see the photo better. Calder nodded, a lump forming in his throat. "Yes, it is." Ivy joined them, looking at the picture with an expression of contentment Calder hadn't seen on her face in a long time. "Now the house has everything again," she declared, "even a picture of everyone." Nellie and Ruby stood beside Ivy, all three contemplating the photograph as if it were a precious treasure. Calder stood a step back, observing the living picture. His three daughters, so different yet so connected. When Amanda came to pick up Ivy at the end of the afternoon, the farewell was marked by tight hugs, promises of frequent calls, and plans for the next visit. Ivy clung to Nellie and Ruby as if she didn't want to leave them, and the twins reciprocated with equal intensity. "I'll be back soon," Ivy promised before getting into her mother's car, Ruby's bracelet still firmly on her wrist. As the car drove away, with Ivy waving from the back window, Calder felt a peace he hadn't experienced in years. The twins held his hands, one on each side, waving until the vehicle disappeared around the bend. Back in the house, Ivy's absence was noticeable, but not painful like before. There was a sense of continuity, of a connection that remained even in physical separation. That night, after putting the twins to bed, Calder stood again before the photograph on the living room wall. The house, once so empty that it echoed his lonely footsteps, now seemed to breathe with newly created memories. Laughter at breakfast, secrets whispered between sisters, friendship bracelets made with childish love. "I didn't replace my daughter," he thought, gently touching Ivy's image in the photograph. "I just let my heart grow bigger." And finally, after years of professional success but personal failure, of material wealth but emotional poverty, Calder Blake felt whole again, not because he had everything, but because he had enough. He had a family. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications so you don't miss the next ones. Leave a like because it helps this story get recommended to more people. See you in the next story.